On a stormy Los Angeles night, Keanu Reeves stepped into a taxi, only to lock eyes with Daniel Harper, the ex-employee he once let go. Daniel was no longer a rising stunt genius, but a desperate father fighting to afford his daughter's medicine. What happened in that cab would change both their lives forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The storm came down hard that night in Los Angeles. Sheets of rain blurred the sidewalks and turned the neon glow of Sunset Boulevard into shimmering puddles of light. Traffic moved in slow streams, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. On the corner, near a flickering street lamp, an old yellow cab sat idling, its engine rattling like it had seen better days. Inside, Daniel Harper leaned forward over the steering wheel, his shoulders tense and his breath fogging up the windshield. He looked down at the handful of bills in his lap. A couple of wrinkled tens, a 5 with the corner torn, and a scatter of coins clinking in the cup holder. He counted them once, then again, hoping the numbers would change. $28.73. Not nearly enough for the rent he owed by Friday, and not nearly enough for Emily's inhaler, which the pharmacist had set aside for him, waiting for payment he didn't have. He thought about her cough that morning, the way she tried to hide it behind a smile, as if her tiny body wasn't gasping for breath. 9 years old, already carrying more weight than any child should. The dispatch radio crackled beside him, jolting him out of his thoughts. Car 12. VIP pickup, Beverly Hills Hotel, front entrance. Daniel reached for the microphone with a hand that still shook from exhaustion. Car 12 here, on my way. He tossed the bills back into the cup holder, shoved the cab into gear, and pulled away from the curb. Every ride mattered. Every dollar brought him closer to keeping Emily safe. Tonight wasn't about comfort, it was survival. The rain hammered harder against the roof as Daniel steered through the slick streets. He knew the Beverly Hills Hotel well. Its pink facade and famous awnings were a world away from his crumbling apartment in Koreatown. It was where the wealthy and untouchable took refuge from the storm, stepping from polished cars under umbrellas held by doormen in crisp uniforms. Daniel had driven past it countless times, but he hadn't pulled into its driveway in years. Something about it always reminded him of the man he used to be, the man who had walked on film sets, called shots, and dreamed of making history with stunts no one else dared design. He turned into Sunset Boulevard, wipers screeching across the glass as they fought to keep up with the downpour. The bright sign of the hotel appeared through the sheets of rain. Valets and tailored coats sprinted between limousines and sports cars, dodging puddles as they carried umbrellas for their clients. Daniel pulled into the line of vehicles, his cab looking small and shabby among the sleek black SUVs and luxury sedans. His tires splashed into a puddle near the entrance, and the doorman gave him a sharp look before motioning him forward. Daniel swallowed hard and pulled up to the front awning. He leaned back against the worn seat cushion, listening to the rhythmic tick of the meter. His hands tapped nervously against the steering wheel as the minutes dragged on. This was a VIP pickup. Someone important. Maybe an executive, maybe an actor he once knew, maybe just another reminder of a world that had forgotten him. He couldn't stop his mind from wandering back to those sets, to the life that had slipped away after one terrible mistake. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to shake it off. Tonight wasn't about the past. It was about Emily, always Emily. The doorman stepped closer, leaning down to Daniel's window. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. "Your passenger will be right out," he said in a clipped tone. "Make sure you're polite, very polite." Daniel forced a nod. He didn't need the reminder. Every customer mattered when your child's medicine depended on it. A minute later, the hotel doors opened. A tall man in a black jacket stepped quickly into the storm. He moved with a familiar confidence, head lowered against the rain, phone pressed to his ear. His dark hair was slick with water, his stride purposeful. Daniel blinked, his breath catching for a moment. Something about the walk tugged at his memory. Before he could piece it together, the man opened the rear door and slid into the back seat. Rain followed him in, dampening the cracked leather as he shut the door firmly behind him. Warner Brothers lot, the man said without looking up from his phone. His voice was calm, but carried the kind of authority Daniel recognized instantly. The syllables landed heavy, triggering a wave of recognition that struck Daniel's chest like a blow. He didn't need to turn around. He didn't need a second glance. That voice had been in his nightmares for years. That face had haunted him from every movie poster and late-night television interview. Keanu Reeves. The same man who had once believed in him. The same man who had signed the papers that ended his career. Daniel's knuckles tightened around the steering wheel. Rain pounded harder on the roof, and his pulse quickened until it drowned out the sound of the storm. Daniel's fingers trembled against the wheel, though he gripped it tight enough to turn his knuckles white. His throat was dry, but the rest of him felt damp and cold, like the storm outside had slipped through the cracks of the cab. He dared a glance in the rearview mirror. Keanu leaned back against the seat, phone still in hand, his expression unreadable as he spoke quietly to someone on the other end. That face. Daniel had seen it 1,000 times, not just in films, but across from him on sets, in the stunt rigging bay, on long nights where every take meant risking bones and breath. Back then, Keanu's nod of approval was enough to make Daniel feel like he belonged. Back then, he had been someone. The cab lurched forward as Daniel forced his focus to the road. Rain streaked down the windshield, blurring the red and white of traffic lights into smears of color. The city stretched ahead, its skyscrapers cloaked in mist. He should have been concentrating on the drive, but his mind kept pulling him back to the last day, the one that shattered everything. A stunt gone wrong, a split-second miscalculation, one man injured. Production halted, and all eyes turning to Daniel, the coordinator responsible for the setup. Keanu had been there that day, silent at first, then speaking with that same measured tone he used in his films, the tone that carried weight even without anger. The decision had come fast. Daniel was let go. Officially, it was about safety. Unofficially, it felt like exile. Now, years later, Keanu Reeves was in his back seat, asking for nothing more than a ride through the storm. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing air into his lungs. He couldn't let the past strangle him here, not with Emily waiting at home for medicine. This was just another job. One more ride, one more fare. Nothing more. But try as he might, he couldn't quiet the rush of memories. The nights on set where he choreographed impossible leaps. The camaraderie of the stunt crew, the adrenaline, the pride. And then the silence that followed once his name was gone from every call sheet. He had traded the roar of cameras for the groan of a taxi's worn-out transmission. Keanu ended his call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. For the first time, his eyes flicked up toward the rearview mirror. Daniel quickly looked away, pretending to adjust the wipers. But he knew Keanu had seen the brief flash of recognition in his face. The cab hit a pothole, jolting them both. Daniel muttered an apology, his voice rough from disuse. Keanu didn't respond, only nodded slightly, his gaze drifting back to the rain-soaked windows. He seemed distant, preoccupied, maybe even tired. To anyone else, he was just another late-night passenger. But to Daniel, he was the ghost of the life he had lost. They passed under the glowing arches of Wilshire Boulevard, neon reflections rippling across the wet pavement. Daniel's heart thudded in rhythm with the windshield wipers. He wanted to say something, to ask if Keanu even remembered him, or if he was just one more name buried under years of projects and faces. But fear clamped his jaw shut. What if Keanu didn't remember? Worse, what if he did? Daniel clenched the wheel tighter. He focused on the road ahead, the blurred lights, the hiss of rain against the glass. This was just another ride, he told himself again. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't. This was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. A turn in the road he hadn't seen coming. The cab wound its way through the slick Los Angeles streets, the wipers working hard against the relentless storm. Daniel stole another glance in the mirror. Keanu sat in calm silence now, arms folded, his face lit by the fleeting glow of passing street lamps. There was a gravity about him, the kind that came not just from fame, but from years of carrying more than most men could bear. Daniel's chest tightened. He remembered the first time he saw that same face up close on a set. He had been young, eager, working as a stunt double with everything to prove. Keanu had walked over, offered him a bottle of water, and said, "Good work today." It had been simple, but it had mattered. To a man like Daniel, words like that were fuel. They were validation. But tonight, sitting behind the wheel of a rusting taxi, Daniel wondered if that validation had been nothing more than an illusion. He was no longer the man he had been, no longer the confident coordinator designing elaborate sequences. He was just a driver fighting to hold his life together. The Beverly Hills Hotel came into view in the distance, its pink walls glowing faintly through the rain. Daniel felt sweat prick his temples despite the cool night air. Each block they traveled felt heavier, like a countdown he couldn't stop. He told himself to keep his mouth shut, to drop the passenger off and drive away. Yet his thoughts burned too hot for silence. He imagined Emily, asleep in their cramped apartment, her small chest rising and falling with the aid of a half-empty inhaler. She didn't know her father once flew across wires, orchestrated daring leaps, commanded sets full of stunt performers. To her, he was just the man who came home smelling of rain and exhaust, tired but still trying. The cab slowed at a red light. Daniel's hands were damp against the wheel. He wanted to speak, to break the silence, but his voice failed him. All that came out was a shallow breath. He glanced at Keanu again. Their eyes met in the mirror for a single moment. Brief, but enough. Keanu's expression didn't change, but Daniel felt something stir in that look, like a flicker of recognition, or maybe just curiosity. He turned back to the road quickly, his pulse racing. The light changed, and the cab rolled forward. The rain was easing, but inside Daniel's chest, the storm only grew louder. He thought about that day again. The accident, the disappointment, the finality of being let go. He thought about the way Keanu had looked at him then, a mix of regret and necessity, as though the decision was painful but inevitable. Now, fate had placed them in the same small space, a cab carrying them through the night. It felt unreal, almost scripted, like some strange twist of destiny. The hotel driveway opened ahead, the doorman waiting under the bright canopy. Daniel eased the cab forward, heart hammering as he pulled into the circle. He told himself to breathe, to steady his voice. But when Keanu shifted in his seat and reached for his wallet, Daniel knew the hardest part had not yet come. This was only the beginning. The doorman held his umbrella steady as the rain came down harder, but Keanu didn't step out. Instead, his voice broke the silence inside the cab, calm and deliberate. "Warner Brothers lot," he said. The words landed in Daniel's ears like a hammer striking metal. Not just any studio, but the very place where his life had splintered years ago. Daniel nodded quickly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, sir." He shifted the cab into gear, the wheels splashing through puddles as he pulled away from the Beverly Hills Hotel. His chest tightened. Warner Brothers wasn't just a destination. For him, it was a graveyard. Every streetlight they passed seemed to drag his thoughts back to that day. He remembered the smell of smoke, the ringing in his ears, the chaos of crew members shouting. He had been responsible for rigging a complex stunt, a high fall followed by a controlled detonation. Everything had been tested, rehearsed, perfected, until the one time it mattered most. A cable snapped. A colleague fell wrong. The medics rushed in, sirens blaring, and the cameras shut down. Daniel could still hear the sickening sound of impact echoing in his memory. It hadn't killed the man, but it had broken bones, shattered trust, and more importantly, shattered Daniel's reputation. Stunt work thrived on precision, and precision demanded faith. One mistake was all it took to lose everything. He remembered Keanu's face that day, concerned for the injured worker, firm when the decision was made. The producers had called Daniel into a small office. The words unsafe judgment and negligence floated across the table like poison. Keanu had been there too, quiet but unshaken. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't cursed, but his silence had cut deeper than anything. That silence had been agreement. That silence had ended Daniel's career. The cab turned onto Sunset Boulevard. Neon signs blurred in the downpour. clubs flashing their half-lit promises. Keanu shifted slightly in the back seat, phone in his hand, his thumb scrolling with practiced ease. The soft glow of the screen reflected across his face. He looked tired, maybe even worn, yet completely at ease in a life that seemed galaxies away from Daniel's. Daniel's own reflection in the windshield told a different story. Hollow cheeks, stubble he hadn't trimmed in weeks, a cap pulled low to hide the gray spreading through his hair. His hands gripped the wheel so tight, the leather groaned. He thought of the calls he had made after the firing, desperate pleas to old colleagues, the rehearsed explanations that spilled out of him, over and over. It wasn't carelessness, he told them. It was a freak accident, a flaw in the equipment, not in his calculations. But the more he explained, the quieter the responses became. And then the calls stopped altogether. Hollywood didn't forgive, it forgot, and Daniel Harper had been erased. Now, with Keanu Reeves sitting only feet behind him, the past came roaring back. Daniel's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He wanted to say something, to break through the silence, to demand if Keanu even remembered his name. But the words caught in his throat. The cab rattled across an intersection, the wipers squealing against the rain-streaked glass. In the rearview mirror, their eyes met for the first time. The connection in the mirror lasted only a second, but it was enough to send Daniel spiraling. Keanu's gaze was steady, unreadable, the kind of look that seemed to carry weight without a single word. Daniel dropped his eyes back to the road instantly, pulse hammering. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Did Keanu remember him? Or was it just the vague recognition that often came when escape mode? Famous man looked at a stranger? Daniel couldn't tell. That single glance, though, had opened the floodgates of memory, and every detail of his downfall came rushing back with cruel clarity. He remembered the long days on set, the endless hours perfecting choreography, the rehearsals where adrenaline mixed with artistry. Back then, he had felt invincible. He was the kind of man who could design danger and control it, who could make chaos look like poetry. Directors trusted him. Crews admired him. Even Keanu had once clapped him on the shoulder, murmuring, "Nice work, Harper." That simple acknowledgment had fueled weeks of work. Then came the accident. The stuntman he was responsible for had trusted his rig. One cable, one link had failed. The fall hadn't been scripted to end that way. Daniel could still hear the sickening crack of bone, the gasps from the crew, the medics shouting orders. When the producers called him into that small office, he had gone in with his chest tight, but his head high. He expected an investigation, maybe a chance to defend himself. Instead, the verdict was already written. Negligence, unsafe, unfit to lead. They didn't even let him gather his equipment from the set. Security escorted him out like he was a criminal. And Daniel remembered the way Keanu stood in the corner of that room, arms crossed, face expressionless. Not angry, not sympathetic, just quiet. That silence had been worse than words. It had sealed Daniel's fate. If Keanu Reeves wasn't willing to stand up for him, then no one would. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. His hands trembled on the wheel. He adjusted his grip, hoping Keanu wouldn't notice. The irony was sharp enough to taste he was driving a cab through storm-soaked streets. And in the back sat the man who had once represented both his highest moment of validation and his final crushing defeat. Keanu shifted again, pulling his gaze back down to his phone. The glow of the screen lit his features, calm and almost detached. He typed a quick message, then slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. For a moment, the silence stretched unbearably, filled only by the hum of tires on wet pavement and the rhythmic slap of the wipers. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, to break the weight of it all. Maybe an apology, though he had nothing to apologize for. Maybe a bitter accusation. Or maybe just his own name, to see if it sparked recognition in those dark, unreadable eyes. But before he could speak, Keanu leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but firm. "You're taking Sunset, right?" Daniel's heart lurched. The sound of Keanu's voice so familiar, so steady, pulled him out of his thoughts. He nodded quickly. forcing a neutral tone. Yes, straight through. Shouldn't be long. Keanu sat back, satisfied, unaware of the storm brewing, only a few feet away. Daniel's pulse refused to settle. He tried to keep his eyes fixed on the slick road ahead, but the mirror kept drawing him back. Every time the wipers cleared the glass, Keanu's reflection appeared calm, composed, completely unaware of the war raging in the driver's seat. How could one man sit so peacefully while another was drowning in memories of him? Daniel thought of the weeks after he was cast out of Hollywood. Doors slammed shut faster than he could knock on them. Old contacts stopped returning his calls. Friends he'd worked beside for years drifted away as if association with him might poison their own reputations. The film industry was small, tight-knit, and merciless. Once branded unreliable, there was no forgiveness. Bills piled up, his savings drained faster than he imagined. He sold his car, then his motorcycle, then the small house his late wife had loved. Each loss chipped away at him, but nothing compared to the look in his daughter's eyes when she asked why they had to move into a cramped apartment. She was too young to understand words like negligence or liability, but she was old enough to notice that her father was shrinking into himself. And now, here he was reduced to a taxi driver, ferrying strangers through the same city where he once commanded sets filled with cameras, lights, and applause. The cruelest twist of all. Fate had placed Keanu Reeves in his back seat. Daniel's stomach tightened. Should he say something? Should he reveal who he was? Or would that only reopen wounds, better left closed? The rain hammered harder, a steady drumbeat that seemed to echo the pounding in his chest. He gripped the wheel tighter, as if clinging to it would keep the memories from dragging him under. But he couldn't stop his eyes from flicking upward once more. And then it happened again. Their eyes locked in the rear view. This time, the connection lingered. Keanu wasn't glancing idly. His gaze was deliberate, focused, searching. It was the kind of look that said he had recognized something or someone. Daniel's breath caught. The cab felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. His heart thudded in his ears, drowning out the sound of the engine. Did Keanu remember? Did he see the broken stunt coordinator who had once stood on his set with pride, only to fall in disgrace? Or did he simply see a tired cab driver, weathered by life and nothing more? The light ahead turned red. Daniel eased the cab to a stop, his hands trembling despite his effort to steady them. In the mirror, Keanu's eyes were still there, calm, unreadable, but undeniably fixed on him. The past and present collided in that silent moment, and Daniel knew there was no escaping it. Long before the taxi rides, long before the rain-soaked nights of counting pennies, Daniel Harper's name had weight in Hollywood. He wasn't a leading man, and his face was never on posters, but behind the cameras, his reputation glowed. He was the stunt coordinator young performers wanted to work under and seasoned professionals trusted with their lives. Daniel had a rare gift. He could look at a script filled with impossible action scenes and design something breathtaking yet safe. Directors admired his creativity. Stuntmen admired his fearlessness. Crew members admired his quiet dedication. He wasn't the loudest voice on set, but when he spoke, people listened. That was how he found himself working on several of Keanu Reeves's films. Their collaboration was natural. Keanu was disciplined, devoted, and insisted on performing as much of his own stunt work as insurance and producers allowed. Daniel respected that. He respected Keanu's work ethic, his humility, his willingness to train for months to perfect a move that might only appear on screen for a few seconds. For Daniel, coordinating stunts on Keanu's projects was more than a job. It was a dream fulfilled. He remembered the first day Keanu shook his hand, thanking him personally for a complex wire rig that had gone flawlessly. Those moments fueled him through the long days, the sleepless nights, the endless rehearsals. He believed he was building a legacy. But dreams have fragile edges. It happened on a blistering hot afternoon during the production of an ambitious action sequence. Daniel had designed a motorcycle stunt that pushed boundaries, but remained within the lines of safety he always drew. The writer was skilled, the setup meticulous, the rehearsals near perfect, until one detail slipped. A miscalibration in the timing of the release, a split-second difference, and the machine veered just off course. The rider lost control. Metal screamed against asphalt. The set froze as the stuntman hit the ground, tumbling until he lay groaning, clutching his leg. Panic erupted. Medics rushed in. Crew members shouted. The director's face went pale. Cameras stopped rolling. Daniel's heart felt like it had been wrenched from his chest. He replayed the calculations in his mind, searching for what had gone wrong. He knew accidents were part of the industry. He had seen them before. But this was his design, his responsibility, his rider lying injured on the pavement. The studio executives wasted no time. By nightfall, the phone calls began. Insurance representatives, producers, legal advisors. Someone needed to take the blame. They demanded names, accountability, a sacrifice to protect the project, and the money invested. Daniel stood in a conference room under the glare of harsh fluorescent lights, his reputation suddenly hanging by a thread. Around the table sat producers with cold expressions, studio lawyers whispering, and Keanu quiet, troubled, looking like a man caught between duty and conscience. The verdict was swift. Daniel would be removed from the production. Officially, it would be framed as negligence. Unofficially, it was the price of moving forward without lawsuits or scandal. Daniel tried to argue, but his voice faltered under the weight of so many eyes, so many careers balanced on the outcome. He turned to Keanu, hoping for an ally, hoping for the man who once shook his hand in gratitude to speak up. Keanu lowered his gaze. The producers had made their decision. All he did was sign the paper placed in front of him. Daniel left the studio lot that evening, carrying a cardboard box filled with his things. Inside were notebooks of sketches, safety diagrams, and photos of rigs he had designed. They were the artifacts of a career he had poured his soul into. Yet now, they felt like pieces of a life that had just been buried. He remembered walking to his car through rows of trailers, hearing the whispers. Crew members avoided his eyes. Some gave sympathetic nods, but most turned away. In Hollywood, failure was contagious. No one wanted to be associated with the man whose name was now linked to the accident. At home, his wife Anna greeted him with her usual warmth, though the worry in her eyes betrayed her calm voice. She listened as Daniel explained what had happened, his voice breaking when he admitted Keanu had signed off on the decision. Anna held his face in her hands. She told him they would get through it, that careers came and went, but family was what mattered. Her strength gave him a flicker of hope. He told himself he could rebuild. There were other projects, other studios. His reputation had taken a hit, but his talent remained. The calls he made in the weeks after proved otherwise. Every inquiry ended the same. Studios were polite but dismissive. Some didn't return his messages. Others simply said, "We've heard about the accident. We can't take that risk." His name had been blacklisted faster than he could fight it. The city that once praised his daring had branded him reckless. Months turned into a year. Their savings dwindled. Daniel took odd jobs on smaller productions, but even those dried up. Soon, he was out of the industry entirely, reduced to warehouse shifts and manual labor just to keep a roof over their heads. Then came the news that shattered him more than the loss of his career ever could. Anna was diagnosed with a rare illness. The treatments were expensive, far beyond what Daniel's patchwork income could cover. He tried everything, borrowing, selling what little they had, working until his body ached, but it was never enough. Anna fought bravely for 2 years. Through every appointment, every late-night hospital stay, she kept her smile for him and for their daughter, Emily. She told Daniel not to blame himself, that life wasn't about the job he lost, but about the family they built. Yet when the sickness finally claimed her, Daniel felt like the last piece of his foundation had crumbled. He was left with Emily, then only 7, looking up at him with the same bright eyes Anna once had. She became his reason to keep breathing, even when he felt hollow inside. He promised her he would find a way, no matter how far he had fallen. That was how Daniel ended up in a cab, scraping together enough to buy a second-hand car painted yellow, hustling through the streets of Los Angeles, ferrying strangers to places he once worked, carrying memories heavier than any passenger. After Anna's passing, Daniel's world shrank to a small apartment and the quiet presence of his daughter, Emily. She was 9 now, still carrying the innocence of childhood, yet already forced to grow wise beyond her years. Daniel often caught her watching him with worried eyes, as if she could sense the heaviness he carried but didn't know how to lift it. He tried to be strong for her. He cooked simple meals, walked her to school, and listened when she spoke about her day. But in the silence of the night, when Emily was asleep, he would sit alone at the kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills, his hands trembling. He thought of Anna's final words, her plea for him to never give up, and felt both strengthened and haunted by them. Work as a taxi driver was grueling. 12-hour shifts left him drained, but it was the only way to afford Emily's medicine for her asthma. The irony was bitter. He had once coordinated stunts worth millions of dollars, calculating risks on massive sets. Now, he calculated miles and tips, hoping each ride would be enough to cover rent and keep Emily healthy. Emily tried to ease his burdens in small ways. She drew colorful pictures and taped them to the fridge, her way of reminding him that there was still joy in the world. She made up stories about the stars, saying her mother was watching them from above, cheering him on. Sometimes, she would leave coins from her piggy bank on the table, whispering that it could help buy her medicine. Daniel would tuck the coins back under her pillow, his throat tight with emotion. Yet no matter how much love Emily gave, the weight of Daniel's past clung to him. Every time he drove past a studio lot, he remembered the accident. Every time he saw a movie billboard, he thought of the career that had slipped away. And every time Emily coughed in the night, he felt the sting of failure, convinced that if he had held on to his career, Anna might have lived, and Emily might have had a childhood free of worry. Still, Daniel endured. He woke each morning with tired eyes, but a stubborn will. He told himself he couldn't afford to fall apart, not when Emily needed him. But beneath that determination lived a gnawing truth. He was a man defined by one mistake, a man trapped by the echo of a past he couldn't escape. And now, fate had delivered Keanu Reeves, the man tied to that turning point, into the back seat of his cab. The silence in the taxi grew heavier with each passing block. Rain tapped against the windshield in uneven rhythms, like a nervous drumbeat echoing Daniel's racing heart. He kept his eyes forward, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. But no matter how hard he tried, he could feel Keanu's gaze in the mirror, curious, uncertain, as though something buried long ago had clawed its way back to the surface. Then, quietly, but unmistakably, Keanu spoke. "Daniel." The single word pierced the air like a blade. Daniel's chest tightened, his throat burning with words he had wanted to say for years, but had buried under exhaustion and shame. His jaw clenched as he glanced into the rearview mirror. Keanu's expression had shifted, his brows drawn together, his eyes carrying the weight of recognition. Daniel's lips parted, but nothing came out at first. He could feel anger and grief warring inside him, a storm that matched the weather outside. Finally, he forced the words through clenched teeth. "So, you do remember me?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but low. "I never forgot. I wasn't sure until now." Daniel let out a bitter laugh, one without humor. "Well, congratulations. You just confirmed the worst chapter of my life is still fresh in your memory." His words came sharp, dripping with years of bitterness. "I guess it's easier to remember the man you ruined than the stunt that went wrong." Keanu sat back, his silence deliberate. He didn't argue, didn't deny. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel through the mirror, as if acknowledging that what was coming had to be said. Daniel's voice cracked with restrained fury. "Do you know what that day cost me? One mistake. One accident. And the producers needed someone to blame. They pointed at me, and you signed the paper. You signed it, Keanu. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" The taxi's wipers scraped across the glass, the sound harsh and grating. Daniel's hands trembled on the wheel, but his voice grew louder, stronger, carrying the anguish of years. "I lost everything. My reputation, My career, the respect of the industry I gave my life to. Every studio, every director, they closed their doors. I went from coordinating stunts for blockbuster films to begging for work I was too overqualified to get. I became invisible. A ghost. He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat, but he pushed through them. And while I was struggling to keep food on the table, my wife was dying. Cancer. Do you know what it's like to sit by the woman you love, watching her fade away, knowing that if you still had your career, she might have had a chance at better treatment? That if you weren't blacklisted, you wouldn't have had to choose between medicine and rent? Keanu's jaw tightened, his eyes lowering, the guilt beginning to show. But Daniel wasn't finished. The floodgate was open, and years of silence poured out like poison he had carried too long. Daniel's breathing grew, heavier, his words jagged with the pain of memories he wished he could forget. You want to know what happened after Sarah died? His voice cracked on her name, but he forced himself to keep going. I buried her with money I didn't have, in a suit I couldn't afford, and I came home to a 9-year-old girl who still looked for her mother in every room. Emily asked me why Mommy didn't get better, and I had to look her in the eyes and tell her we just didn't have enough. Keanu's chest rose slowly, as if every word Daniel spoke was a weight pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to say something, but Daniel cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. "Don't," Daniel hissed. "Don't you dare tell me you're sorry. Sorry doesn't buy an inhaler for Emily when she wakes up gasping for air in the middle of the night. Sorry doesn't pay the doctor who looks at me with pity, because he knows I can't afford the treatments she really needs. Do you understand that? My little girl, 9 years old, and she's learning to ration her own medicine because her father can't keep up with the cost." His grip on the steering wheel tightened again, his knuckles pale in the dim glow of the dashboard. Do you know what humiliation tastes like? It tastes like counting crumpled dollar bills at midnight, praying you can stretch $27 into another week of groceries. It tastes like driving strangers around this city while pretending you don't hear their comments about how cab drivers are failures. It tastes like watching your daughter pretend she isn't hungry, just so you can eat the last piece of bread in the house. Keanu pressed his lips together, his eyes reflecting something Daniel hadn't expected: genuine sorrow. But Daniel wasn't ready to let up. The bitterness had built too long, and it poured out now, unstoppable. "She deserves better than this," Daniel said, his voice trembling, almost breaking. "Emily deserves a father who can give her a safe home, good meals, a childhood free from fear. Instead, she gets me. A man who failed in his career, failed his wife, and now fails his daughter every single day. And every time I look at her, I wonder if she knows the truth that I was thrown aside by the man sitting in my back seat tonight." The taxi turned down an empty stretch of road, the storm easing into a drizzle. In the silence between his words, Daniel's chest rose and fell like a man carrying years of bricks on his shoulders. He blinked hard, trying to push back tears, but one escaped anyway, sliding down his cheek. Keanu finally spoke, his voice quiet but weighted. "Daniel, I never stopped thinking about that day." But Daniel shook his head bitterly. "You thought about it from your mansion. I lived it every single day." The taxi rolled past glowing billboards and shuttered storefronts, but inside, it felt like the world had shrunk to the space between two men carrying different versions of the same memory. Daniel's voice, ragged but steady, filled the cab again. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked, staring straight ahead at the rain-slick streets. "It isn't the hunger, or the eviction notices, or even Emily's medical bills. It's the way people look at me now, like I'm invisible, like I went from someone respected to someone no one wants to claim. I walk into a room, and people remember that accident. They whisper, they cross their arms. Hollywood forgot every stunt I ever pulled off, every risk I took to make others look good. All they remember is the one time it went wrong, and your name being attached to that, it sealed the coffin." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his reflection caught in the glass divider of the cab. His hands rested on his knees, but his eyes carried the weight of recognition. Daniel saw it, but he didn't let him speak. "You're sitting there with all your success, All your films, all your fans cheering your off. Name. Do you ever stop to wonder what happens to the people who get left behind in your shadow? Do you ever wonder how a man survives when every door slams shut, not because of what he did, but because of who cast him aside? Daniel's throat tightened, but he forced the words out, each one like ripping open an old wound. I have to watch Emily grow up too fast. She worries about me more than she worries about her own homework. She sneaks food into my bag when she thinks I'm not looking. She hides her coughing fits so I won't feel guilty about not affording a refill for her inhaler. She's 9 years old, Keanu. 9. And she carries herself like she's 40 because her father couldn't protect her from poverty. The car slowed at a red light. Rain drizzled across the windshield, droplets chasing one another down the glass. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know what that feels like? To see your child give up pieces of their childhood so you can pretend you're still strong? It kills me every day. And every time she smiles, every time she calls me her hero, I feel like a fraud. Silence stretched across the car, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the rhythmic sweep of the wipers and the faint hum of the engine. Finally, Keanu lifted his gaze, and their eyes locked in the rearview mirror. His voice was low, almost broken. You're not a fraud, Daniel. You're a father doing everything he can. And you're right, I failed you. Not just back then, but in every year that followed, when I could have reached out and didn't. I thought I was protecting the studio, protecting the project. But I see now, I destroyed more than a career. I hurt a man's entire life. Daniel's jaw tightened, unsure if Keanu's guilt gave him relief or just reopened the wound. The cab started moving again, but the silence now was different. It was not emptiness. It was the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. The city lights flickered across the wet pavement, and the hum of the engine filled the quiet space between them. Daniel's chest rose and fell in slow, heavy breaths. He didn't want to say what came next, but the memory pressed against his ribs until it spilled out. This morning, he said quietly, Emily looked at me with those wide eyes of hers. She could tell I was upset. She always can. And she said, "Don't be sad, Daddy. Heroes get back up." Keanu's eyes lifted from his hands, startled by the simple weight of the words. Daniel's voice trembled as he went on. I didn't know what to say. She doesn't understand that her so-called hero is just a man who can't even pay for her medicine on time. She sees me as someone strong, unbreakable. But inside, his throat closed. He gripped the wheel tighter, forcing himself to keep steady. Inside, I feel like nothing but a failure, like a man who's broken beyond repair. The rain tapped lightly against the roof, softer now, as though listening. Daniel's gaze fixed on the blurred reflection of streetlights in the windshield. She deserves more than this. More than a father who drives 12-hour shifts and comes home with pockets full of coins instead of hope. More than someone blacklisted, shamed, and left to rot in the shadows of an industry he once loved. Keanu shifted slightly in the back seat. His expression, usually calm, betrayed something raw. He had heard anger from Daniel earlier, but this was different. It wasn't rage. It was desperation, the kind that clawed its way into every sentence. Daniel continued, his voice hollow. I watch her draw pictures of superheroes. She puts me in them every single time. She thinks I'm someone who saves the day. But I can't save her from wheezing in the middle of the night. I can't save her from missing field trips because the money isn't there. I can't even save her from the embarrassment of handing in late. Lunch payments at school. Keanu's chest tightened. He leaned forward slightly, his reflection shimmering in the rearview mirror. He had spent years surrounded by adoring fans, by scripts that painted him as the savior, the noble figure. But here was a man who lived that story in the harshest of ways, unseen, uncelebrated, barely holding his world together with frayed strings. You're wrong about one thing, Keanu said softly. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the wheel, but he didn't interrupt. You said you're broken. You said you failed her. But if she still calls you her hero, then you haven't failed. Maybe you've stumbled. Maybe you've been knocked down harder than anyone should ever be, but you're still there. That little girl believes in you because she sees something you can't see in yourself." Daniel swallowed hard, the words cutting deeper than he expected. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to believe them. But mistrust still burned low in his chest, a reminder of betrayal and lost years. He clenched his jaw, letting the silence speak where he could not. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the glass. He shook his head, almost as if trying to rid himself of the fragile hope Keanu's words carried. "You don't understand," he muttered. "You walk into rooms where people clap for you. I walk into grocery stores counting coins and praying Emily doesn't notice when I put food back on the shelf. You can't understand what it's like to be her father and feel powerless." The bitterness returned, though softer now, wrapped in pain rather than fury. Keanu didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the side window where raindrops chased each other downward like small lives racing to their end. He thought of his own past, of the times he had faced emptiness, loss, silence. He knew the shape of grief, even if his life looked different from Daniel's. Finally, he spoke. "You're right. I can't understand every part of it. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to look at your child and wonder how to pay for medicine. But I do know what it feels like to lose, to wake up every morning carrying guilt that doesn't let go." Daniel's eyes flicked up at the mirror, surprised by the honesty in Keanu's tone. "I remember that day, Daniel," Keanu continued quietly. "I remember signing that paper. The producers said it was the only choice. They made it sound like you were reckless, like you couldn't be trusted again. But I never believed you were the problem. I knew you were better than that. Still, I signed. I went along with it, and that's haunted me ever since." The wheel wavered slightly under Daniel's grip. He blinked hard, forcing his eyes back to the road. "Haunted you?" he asked, the word heavy with disbelief. "Do you know what it did to me? To Emily? Haunted you is a whisper compared to the storm it left us in." Keanu didn't flinch. He nodded, accepting the truth without defense. "I know. That's why I listened just now. Every word about Emily, every word about you feeling broken. I can hear it. You're not angry because you hate me. You're angry because you loved what you did, and it was taken away. You're angry because your little girl deserves a father who feels whole again." Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of Emily at the kitchen table with her crayons, drawing him in capes and armor, fighting imaginary villains. He thought of how she believed in him when he couldn't even look in the mirror. The ache of it was unbearable. For the first time that night, he didn't spit out a reply. He just kept driving, the rain streaking across the windshield like tears too stubborn to fall. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the engine and the rhythm of rain. Daniel gripped the wheel, his knuckles pale, his jaw locked tight. He wanted to push Keanu away, to protect the fragile armor he had built from years of bitterness. But his daughter's voice would not leave him. He heard it again, as if she were whispering in the back seat. "Don't be sad, Daddy. Heroes get back up." The words cracked him open. He swallowed hard, his throat aching. "Emily doesn't see me like this," he said finally. "She sees something else. A hero. Someone who gets knocked down but still stands. But the truth is, I don't stand anymore. I crawl. Every day I crawl through bills and rejection letters, through nights without sleep, through mornings where I pretend we're okay so she doesn't have to worry." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but soft. "Then maybe her vision of you is stronger than yours, of yourself. Maybe she sees what you can't right now." Daniel let out a bitter laugh, though it lacked the sharpness of before. "You think a child's drawings can erase what I've become? You think her words can pull me out of this hole?" Keanu shook his head. "No, but I think her words can remind you that you're not alone in it. You're not just fighting for survival. You're fighting because she still believes. And sometimes belief is stronger than skill, stronger than circumstance." Daniel's eyes blurred with tears he refused to shed. He remembered Emily placing her tiny hand on his cheek that morning, telling him not to give up. She didn't care about his failures, only about his presence, his effort, his love. It pierced through his bitterness like a quiet light in the dark. For the first time in years, he felt something stir. A flicker of dignity he thought had died the day he walked off a set in disgrace. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the faint recognition that maybe Keanu wasn't his enemy. Maybe the true enemy had always been the despair that gnawed at him from within. Keanu's gaze caught his in the rearview mirror, steady and unflinching. "Daniel, I can't erase the past. I can't bring back what was lost. But I can listen. I can see you now, not as a mistake, but as a man who's still standing for his daughter, even when you feel broken." Daniel's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. The bitterness hadn't vanished, but it had softened under the weight of Emily's faith and Keanu's quiet acknowledgment. Seeds of reconciliation had been planted, fragile and trembling, but real. He didn't answer. He just drove, the headlights cutting through the storm, carrying both men deeper into a night that promised no easy answers, but hinted, for the first time, at the possibility of change. The cab rolled down a stretch of freeway where the storm had slowed into a mist, the city lights blurring in the damp air. Daniel's hands clung to the steering wheel, but the weight of his own words lingered heavy in the air. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was loaded, thick with unspoken truths. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "Daniel, pull over, right there, under the bridge." Daniel's brows furrowed. He hesitated, but the look in the rearview mirror was unyielding. With a sigh, he flicked on the blinker and guided the taxi beneath an overpass, the tires crunching on wet gravel as the car slowed to a stop. The patter of rain against the roof softened, muffled by the shelter above. For a moment, neither man moved. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. He wondered if Keanu was about to step out, leave the ride unfinished, and disappear back into the untouchable world he belonged to. Instead, Keanu opened the door, stepped out into the drizzle, and walked around to the front passenger side. The creak of the door opening made Daniel's grip tighten. Keanu slid into the front seat beside him. It was a small cab, and the sudden closeness stripped away any distance they had maintained. Daniel's breath hitched. He kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, unwilling to meet Keanu's gaze. But Keanu turned toward him, his tone quiet, but unwavering. "I need you to hear this, face to face. No mirrors, no glass between us." Daniel swallowed hard, jaw clenched. "I've heard enough already." Keanu shook his head. "No, you've heard your side, and you're right to be angry, but you haven't heard mine." The words hung there, cutting through the damp air. Daniel finally turned his head, his eyes narrowing. He expected excuses, the kind he had heard from producers, from executives, from everyone who had tried to wash their hands of the accident. But Keanu's face didn't carry the slick mask of a studio man. It carried something else, guilt. "I never wanted you fired," Keanu said plainly. His voice didn't rise, didn't falter, not once. "The moment they brought it up, I pushed back. I told them you were one of the best I had ever worked with. I told them it wasn't your fault." He paused, taking a breath. But the studio didn't care. They wanted the show to go on. They wanted insurance clear. They wanted a scapegoat. And they made it clear if I didn't sign, the film would shut down, hundreds of jobs would be lost, millions wasted. They put it on me. They forced my hand. Daniel's breath caught, his chest tightening as though the walls of the cab had closed in. Keanu's eyes lowered. "I signed, Daniel, and I hated myself for it. I hated that I let them push me into a choice that destroyed you. That signature has followed me all these years. Every time I walk onto a set, every time I see a coordinator setting up a rig, I think of you." Daniel sat frozen, his hands still clutching the steering wheel, though the engine idled softly beneath them. The words hung in the air, unbelievable and heavy. He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. "You expect me to believe that?" His voice was sharp, edged with years of bitterness. "That you fought for me? That you cared at all when you signed my life away?" Keanu didn't flinch. His gaze stayed steady, calm, but full of regret. I don't expect you to believe me right away. I expect you to hate me. I've hated myself for it too. That day, I should have refused. I should have walked, but I thought I was protecting the film, the crew, the jobs on the line. I told myself I was doing the right thing, and I've lived with the truth that I was wrong ever since. Daniel let out a dry laugh, bitter and hollow. You lived with it. I lived through it. You got more films, more praise, more chances to be the hero on screen. I got the scraps of a life that used to mean something. So forgive me if your guilt doesn't mean much to me. The words struck, but Keanu accepted them. His shoulders dropped slightly, as though carrying the blow. You're right. My guilt doesn't erase what happened to you. It doesn't bring back your career. It doesn't bring back your wife. But I need you to know the truth. I didn't abandon you because I thought you failed. I abandoned you because I was too much of a coward to stand against the machine pressing down on me. Daniel's jaw tightened. The fury that had burned for years flared again, but beneath it was something he hadn't expected: doubt. He wanted to hate Keanu, wanted to keep his anger sharp and clean. But the man sitting beside him wasn't giving rehearsed lines. He wasn't protecting his reputation. His voice carried a sincerity that Daniel couldn't ignore. He looked away, staring at the dark tunnel ahead where the road disappeared into shadows. It wasn't just my job. It was my name, my identity. It told the world I wasn't safe to trust. And once that was out there was no taking it back. Keanu's expression softened. I know. I've thought about it more than you can imagine. I've thought about what might have been if I'd walked out of that room, if I'd put my career on the line for yours. And every time, the answer is the same. I failed you. Daniel's chest tightened. He had spent years painting Keanu as untouchable, as someone who had betrayed him without thought. Now, sitting this close, hearing him confess his guilt in raw, unguarded words, the picture shifted. It didn't erase the pain, but it complicated it. The mistrust remained, but the anger no longer burned alone. The cab sat still under the bridge, its headlights casting long beams into the mist. Daniel loosened his grip on the wheel at last, his hands aching from holding so tight. He turned toward Keanu, eyes sharp but clouded with exhaustion. So you've been carrying guilt, Daniel said, his voice low. Tell me, what good has that done me? Did your guilt pay for Emily's inhaler? Did it keep Anna alive? Did it stop the world from spitting me out like I was nothing? Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He nodded once, slowly. No, it didn't. My guilt didn't help you. It only reminded me of my failure every day. And that's why I needed to stop this car. Because I can't keep carrying it silently while you carry all the consequences. Daniel's throat tightened, a lump forming that he tried to swallow down. You think saying this now changes anything? You think it makes it easier to wake up in the morning knowing my daughter depends on a man who's already broken? Keanu leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his voice quiet but deliberate. No, but maybe it makes a difference that you finally know the truth. You didn't lose your career because you failed. You lost it because I failed. I gave in to pressure I should have fought. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. The words settled like stones in the cramped cab. Daniel looked away, his chest heaving with breaths he couldn't steady. Part of him wanted to scream, to tell Keanu that no confession could erase years of struggle. But another part, the one that remembered the morning when Emily called him a hero, felt the weight of hearing something he had never expected. Responsibility, spoken aloud by the man who once stayed silent. The rain slowed outside, dripping in steady lines from the overpass above. For the first time that night, Daniel's anger faltered. He rubbed a hand across his face, weary lines etched deep into his skin. You don't know how hard it is to believe you. I want to hate you. I need to hate you. Because if I don't, his voice cracked. If I don't, then I've wasted years blaming the wrong man. Keanu's voice softened further. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking you to see me for what I am, a man who made a choice he's ashamed of, and who sees now the damage it caused. You deserved better than what I gave you." Daniel met his eyes at last, searching them for any trace of deception. But all he saw was sincerity, raw and unguarded. It didn't erase the mistrust, but it planted something new, a fragile crack in the wall of anger he had built, one that might grow with time. The cab remained still, two men caught between the wreckage of the past and the uncertain road ahead. The cab sat silent under the bridge, the storm outside now reduced to a faint drizzle. Daniel leaned back, weary, his mind torn between disbelief and the faint tremors of something he didn't want to name hope. Keanu's confession lingered, but Daniel's mistrust held steady, a shield built from years of anger. Then, Keanu shifted in his seat, his tone quieter but steadier than before. "There's something else I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." Daniel narrowed his eyes, his instincts bristled. "What now? More guilt? More apologies?" Keanu shook his head. "No, the truth." Daniel's pulse quickened, though he masked it with a bitter smirk. And what truth could possibly matter at this point? Keanu held his gaze. "That stunt, the one that ended your career, it wasn't your fault." The words struck like a lightning bolt. Daniel blinked, his hands gripping the wheel, though the car remained still. "What did you just say?" Keanu leaned closer, his voice low but unwavering. "After the accident, the studio ran a private analysis. They reviewed the setup, the rehearsals, the equipment, and what they found was clear. Your design wasn't flawed. Your timing wasn't wrong. The equipment was. A cable, purchased from a cheaper vendor to save money, snapped under pressure it was never rated to handle. It was a studio failure, not yours." Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. His mouth went dry. He had spent years replaying the stunt in his mind, questioning every calculation, every choice. He had punished himself daily with the belief that his error had cost another man's safety, his wife's security, his daughter's future. And now, Keanu was saying it wasn't his fault at all. His voice shook. "You're lying." Keanu shook his head slowly. "I'm not. I saw the report with my own eyes. I fought to make it public, but the studio buried it. They said exposing it would spark lawsuits, insurance chaos, and bad press. They told me to stay quiet, so I did. But I couldn't let it disappear completely. I kept a copy, and I kept the footage of the stunt, the raw camera angles that proved your rig worked exactly as designed until that faulty cable gave way." Daniel's breath caught. The world tilted as if the ground beneath the cab had shifted. For years, he had lived with the crushing certainty of his own failure. Now, with a few sentences, Keanu was telling him that the shame, the guilt, the endless nights of doubt had been built on a lie. "Why didn't you say this before?" Daniel's voice broke, a mixture of rage and disbelief. Keanu's eyes lowered. "Because I didn't know how. Because I was a coward. And because I didn't realize just how much it had destroyed you until tonight." Daniel's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. His knuckles pressed into the steering wheel until the old leather creaked under his grip. "You're telling me, all these years, I carried the blame for something I didn't do? That my name was dragged through the mud, my family torn apart, because some executive wanted to save a few dollars on equipment?" Keanu's jaw tightened. "Yes, that's exactly what happened." Daniel laughed, but it was hollow, broken. He shook his head, as if trying to fling away the thought. "Do you know how many nights I stayed up, replaying every second in my mind, asking myself if I miscalculated, if I overlooked some detail? I tortured myself, Keanu. I convinced myself I deserved everything that followed." His voice cracked, and the whole time, it wasn't me. Keanu's eyes were steady, though regret shimmered in them. "No, it wasn't you." Daniel's body slumped, his strength leaking out of him like water through a sieve. He stared at the rain streaking down the windshield, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you put your arm around me that day and tell to me I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't a failure?" Keanu inhaled deeply, his shoulders heavy. Because I was afraid. The studio had already buried the report. They told me that if I spoke out, I'd be sued for breach of contract, blacklisted, maybe even taken off the film, and I let their threats control me. I told myself keeping quiet was the practical choice. But the truth is, I was selfish. I let them ruin you so they wouldn't ruin me. Daniel closed his eyes, the confession cutting deeper than any insult ever could. So while I drove cabs, begged doctors, and buried my wife, you sat with the evidence that I wasn't guilty. You let me drown alone. Keanu's voice lowered to almost a whisper. I know. And I hate myself for it. That's why I kept the files hidden all these years. I couldn't let them vanish completely. I thought one day I'd have the courage to tell you. I didn't expect it to happen like this, in the back of a taxi. But maybe this is the only way it could have. Daniel's eyes snapped open, fury mixing with grief. Show me. Don't just sit here with words. If you really have it, if you're not just trying to ease your guilt, prove it. Keanu nodded once. I can. I will. I still have the drive with the footage and the documents. And I'll put them in your hands. You deserve to see the truth with your own eyes. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the ground beneath him shift. Not toward healing, not yet, but away from the endless pit of self-blame. Daniel sat in silence, his mind spinning faster than the rainwater trickling down the glass. He wanted to scream, to weep, to hit something, but no sound came. The revelation pressed on his chest like a weight, too heavy to move. For years, he had lived inside a cage, built from his own shame. Now the bars were bending, and the sudden freedom felt terrifying. His voice came out rough, uneven. Do you know what you've done to me by telling me this now? You've taken everything I thought I knew about myself and torn it apart. I built my life around believing I failed. I punished myself every single day. And now you're telling me I didn't deserve it? Keanu's eyes softened, his own guilt plain. Yes, I am. You didn't deserve it. None of it. Daniel's head fell back against the seat. A laugh escaped him, ragged and bitter. But this time, it carried something else. A tremor of disbelief that almost felt like relief. All those years, Emily thinking her father was broken. Anna, believing I had lost everything because of my mistake. They both carried it with me, when the blame never should have been mine. He rubbed his hands over his face, his shoulders shaking. I thought I'd failed them. I thought I'd failed everyone. And the whole time, I was paying for someone else's greed. Keanu placed a hand gently on the dashboard, leaning closer. Daniel, I can't give you back the years you lost. I can't bring Anna back, or undo what Emily has had to endure, but I can give you the truth. And I can stand beside you while you decide what to do with it. Daniel lowered his hands, his eyes bloodshot but clear. Why me? Why now? After all this time? Keanu met his gaze firmly. Because tonight, for the first time in years, I had the chance to sit across from you, to see your pain, to hear it. And I realize silence has cost too much already. You deserve to know you weren't the failure. You never were. The words lingered, soft but undeniable. Daniel felt something inside him fracture not from pain this time, but from the first flicker of release. He had been carrying a coffin filled with blame that wasn't his, and Keanu had just pried open the lid. Daniel's eyes drifted to the road ahead, wet and gleaming under the bridge lights. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. If what you're saying is true, then maybe Emily was right all along. Maybe heroes do get back up. For the mother, the first time, Daniel allowed himself to imagine that he hadn't been broken, only buried. The cab was quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of anger. It was the silence of revelation, the aftermath of truth too heavy to ignore. Daniel's breathing steadied, though his hands still trembled faintly on the wheel. Keanu sat beside him in the passenger seat, his gaze turned toward the road, but his mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, Keanu asked softly, "How's Emily?" The question cut through Daniel like a knife. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. She's strong. Stronger than me. Most days. She doesn't complain. She smiles even when she shouldn't. She carries me more than I carry her." He paused, his voice low. "But she's sicker than I let on." Keanu turned toward him, concern in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Daniel exhaled, his breath heavy with shame. "Her asthma isn't just asthma anymore. The doctors say her lungs are getting worse. They've talked about advanced treatments, therapies that could help her breathe easier, maybe even give her a normal childhood. But the cost..." His voice cracked, and he shook his head. "The cost is more than I could ever hope to afford. Insurance doesn't cover it. I don't qualify for programs. So I do what I can: cheap inhalers, emergency visits, prayers." Keanu's brow furrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. "And Emily knows this?" Daniel's shoulders slumped. "She figured it out. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. She heard me arguing with the pharmacist once, begging for more time to pay. She saw the bills stacked on the table. She realized the truth before I ever told her. And you know what she did?" His voice trembled as he went on. "She told me she was fine. She told me she didn't need the medicine as much as I thought. She pretended to be better so I wouldn't feel guilty." The words hit Keanu like a blow. His chest tightened, his hands curling into fists against his knees. "She hides her pain to protect you." Daniel nodded, tears glistening in his tired eyes. "She's just a little girl. She should be worrying about school, about friends, about cartoons, but instead, she worries about me. She watches me count change, and then she hides her coughs so I won't panic. Sometimes I hear her at night, gasping quietly in her room, trying not to wake me. Do you know what it does to a father to hear that? To know your child is suffering and you can't fix it?" The air in the cab grew heavier, the drizzle outside whispering against the roof like a reminder of time slipping away. Keanu swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had played roles where he fought against impossible odds, where he rescued those in need. But this wasn't a script. This was a real little girl, suffering quietly because the world had turned its back on her father. Daniel's voice lowered to a whisper. "Every morning she tells me she's okay, just so I can keep going. She's the one holding me together, when it should be the other way around." Keanu's eyes burned with intensity. "Daniel, I won't let her keep suffering because of what Hollywood did to you. I won't stand by while she pays the price for their mistakes." For the first time, Daniel turned his head fully to meet Keanu's gaze. There was no bitterness in his eyes now, only exhaustion and a fragile, flickering hope he barely allowed himself to feel. Daniel shook his head slowly, as if fighting against the weight of what he had just revealed. "You talk like it's simple, but it's not. Every doctor's visit ends with the same thing: numbers I can't reach, treatments I can't touch. They look at me with pity, like I'm a man out of his depth, and maybe I am. I've learned to live with my failures, but watching Emily pretend she's not sick, that's the kind of pain you don't get used to." Keanu's jaw tightened, his prior eyes unwavering. No child should carry that, and no father should have to choose between food on the table and his daughter's breath. That isn't your failure, Daniel. That's the failure of a system that left you behind. Daniel let out a bitter sigh. Easy words for someone like you. You can step off a set and buy a hospital if you want. Me? I'm scraping by, counting every dime, and teaching my daughter how to smile through pain. We live in two different worlds. Keanu leaned closer, his voice steady but fierce. Then let me step into yours. I can't erase the years you've lost, but I can stop Emily from losing hers. If the treatments exist, she'll get them. No excuses. No delays. I swear it. Daniel blinked hard, struggling to keep his composure. Hope was dangerous. It had betrayed him before. Why now, Keanu? Why suddenly care after all this time? Keanu didn't hesitate. Because tonight I saw the cost of my silence. I saw what you've carried alone. And when you told me about Emily hiding her sickness to protect you, it broke me. That's not something a little girl should ever have to do. She shouldn't suffer because men in suits made cruel choices years ago. The words landed heavy, but they carried a weight Daniel couldn't dismiss. His throat tightened as he whispered, She's all I have left." Keanu's eyes softened. "Then let's make sure you don't lose her too. You've been punished enough for mistakes that weren't yours. Emily deserves a father who can breathe freely beside her, not one weighed down by fear every night." Daniel turned his gaze back to the windshield, the blurred glow of city lights reflecting in his tired eyes. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to let the promise wrap around him like a lifeline, but trust came hard after so many years of betrayal. Still, something inside him shifted. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel entirely alone. Keanu sat back, his voice firm with quiet resolve. "I won't let her story end the way yours nearly did. Whatever it takes, Daniel, she will get the care she needs." The words hung in the air, not as empty comfort, but as a vow. Daniel said nothing, but in the silence, a single tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. The cab finally rolled back onto the main road, the storm now only a faint mist. Daniel kept his eyes forward, though his chest still ached with everything he had confessed. The revelations, the truths about Emily, the guilt Keanu had admitted, it all pressed against him like a tide he couldn't hold back. For several minutes, Keanu said nothing. Then, almost suddenly, his voice broke the quiet. "Come with me tomorrow, to the studio." Daniel blinked, his brows furrowing. "What are you talking about?" Keanu turned toward him, his expression steady, resolved. "Warner Brothers. I want you to come with me. Walk through those doors again. Let me introduce you not as a driver, not as a man beaten down by lies, but as who you really are, a brilliant stunt coordinator who deserves his name back." Daniel let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "You think I can just walk back in there? After all these years? Those people barely remember me. And if they do, it's as the man who ruined a stunt and nearly destroyed a film. They don't see genius. They see failure." Keanu's eyes didn't waver. "Then let me change what they see." The firmness in his tone made Daniel's chest tighten. "You can't rewrite history, Keanu. Those doors closed on me a long time ago, and no one inside that studio wants to hear my name again." Keanu leaned closer, his voice softer but even more determined. "You're wrong. They'll hear it if I speak it, and I will. I've carried your silence long enough. Tomorrow I'll make sure they understand the truth that Daniel Harper wasn't reckless, that he wasn't the weak link, but that he was one of the best minds the industry had. I'll tell them they're still using your techniques, your rigging methods, your safety drills, because they are, Daniel. They just buried the credit with you." Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his throat thick. "And you think they'll believe you? That they'll suddenly pretend the last decade didn't happen?" Keanu nodded once. "Not pretend. Correct. They'll correct what should never have been erased." The conviction in his voice stunned Daniel. He wanted to argue, to tear the idea apart before hope could dig its claws into him. But somewhere deep inside, the thought of walking back into the place he once called home stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Fear, longing, and the fragile echo of pride. "You don't know what you're asking of me," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "To step back into those halls, to face those faces. I don't know if I can." Keanu's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then lean on me. Tomorrow, when you walk through those doors, you won't walk alone." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. He didn't answer right away. But the silence carried something unspoken, something Keanu recognized. For the first time in years, Daniel was considering the impossible. The next morning, Daniel stood at the gates of the Warner Brothers lot. His cab parked far from sight. His palms were damp, and his heart beat with the same rhythm it had years ago on set before a dangerous stunt. He had told himself 100 reasons not to come, but Keanu's promise echoed in his mind he would not walk in alone. True to his word, Keanu was there, waiting for him just beyond the security checkpoint. He greeted Daniel not with pity, but with the respect of an equal. Without hesitation, he spoke to the guards, his presence enough to open the gates that had been locked to Daniel for so long. Walking side by side, Daniel felt the weight of familiar air, the smell of sawdust from set construction, the echo of voices calling cues, the faint hum of generators powering lights. Memories surged, painful and sweet. He had once belonged here. Now he felt like an intruder wearing a stranger's skin. They entered a rehearsal stage, bustling with activity. Young stunt performers practiced wire work, flipping and tumbling through carefully choreographed sequences. Daniel's eyes followed their movements instinctively, noting flaws, adjustments that could make them safer. For a brief moment, his old instincts came alive, reminding him of the man he once was. Then, he heard a voice behind him. "Is that Harper?" He turned. An old colleague, now gray around the edges, stood staring at him in disbelief. Others followed, whispers rising. Some eyes widened with recognition, others with judgment. Daniel's stomach twisted. He braced himself for the ridicule, the dismissal. Before anyone could speak further, Keanu stepped forward. His voice carried across the room, steady and commanding. "Yes, it's Daniel Harper, and I want everyone here to know this man is not the failure you were told he was. He is the reason half the safety methods you use today even exist." The room stilled. Stunt performers froze mid-practice. Producers glanced up from their notes. Daniel felt every eye burn into him. Keanu continued, his words sharp and deliberate. "When I first worked with Daniel, I saw a mind unlike any other in this business. He designed stunts that were breathtaking. Yes, but he also designed systems that kept us alive. He was never reckless. He was never careless. The stunt that ended his career wasn't his failure. It was the studio's. And the proof of that has been hidden for too long." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to vanish, but Keanu's voice held him steady. This man deserves recognition, not exile. His innovations are still saving lives on sets today. If you don't believe me, look at your harnesses, your rigging, your safety lines. His fingerprints are all over them. You've been working with his genius for years, without even knowing his name. Shock spread through the room. Old colleagues who once avoided his calls now stared with something new in their eyes. Doubt, curiosity, even respect. Daniel stood frozen, his throat thick with emotion. For years he had been invisible. Now, because of Keanu's words, the silence surrounding his name was cracking open. For the first time, Daniel felt the faint stirrings of restoration. The rehearsal stage still buzzed with whispers, but Keanu placed a firm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Come with me," he said. There was no hesitation in his tone, only certainty. Daniel followed him out of the room, his legs heavy, his heart pounding from the storm of recognition he had just faced. They crossed the lot in silence, moving past sound stages and offices, until Keanu led him to a nondescript building tucked into the far corner of the studio. It looked ordinary, the kind of structure people walked past without noticing. But Keanu unlocked the door with a keycard and motioned him inside. The air was cool, tinged with the faint smell of dust and old film stock. Rows of cabinets lined the walls, stacked with binders, reels, and hard drives. It wasn't a set or an office. It was a vault of memory. Daniel frowned, his voice wary. "What is this place?" Keanu looked around, his expression solemn. "A private archive. Not the official studio records, the ones they keep polished in public. This is where the things they want forgotten end up. Reports, footage, testimonies that never made it into the light." Daniel's pulse quickened. His throat felt tight. "And why are we here?" Keanu walked deeper into the room, stopping at a drawer marked with faded tape. He opened it and pulled out a battered hard drive and a thick binder of papers. He set them on a nearby table, the sound echoing in the quiet space. Then he turned back to Daniel, his eyes steady. "Because this is where your truth has been sitting for more than a decade." Daniel stepped closer, his hands trembling as he reached for the binder. The cover was cracked, its corners bent, but the words stamped on the front made his breath catch. "Stunt Incident Review, Harper." His chest constricted. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were reports typed in cold, clinical language, technical analyses, equipment breakdowns, witness testimonies. His eyes scanned the lines, each one confirming what Keanu had already told him. Harness failure due to manufacturing defect. Timing of coordinator accurate. Rigging setup within approved safety standards. Every page screamed the same truth. Daniel had not failed. The equipment had. He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. For years, he had carried the weight of guilt, convinced he was the cause of ruin. And here, in black and white, was the proof that he had been innocent all along. Keanu powered on the hard drive, connecting it to a monitor in the corner. He pulled up raw footage of the stunt. Daniel forced himself to watch. He saw the setup, the rigging, the calculations he had made. He saw the rider launch, everything smooth, precise, until the cable snapped, sending the stunt spiraling into chaos. Daniel's stomach clenched, but his eyes caught what mattered most. The angle clearly showed his design was flawless. The failure wasn't in the plan, it was in the equipment that betrayed them. His knees weakened, and he gripped the edge of the table for support. All this time, it wasn't me. Keanu's voice was quiet, but resolute. It never was. And I've been waiting for the moment to make it right. I didn't want you to hear it as a rumor or in passing. I wanted you to see it yourself. To know beyond any doubt that you were never the failure they made you out to be. Daniel's hands hovered over the binder, as if it were something sacred, something he was afraid to lose. His voice came out low, ragged. All these years I've been drowning, and this was sitting in a drawer? Keanu's expression carried both guilt and resolve. I fought to keep it from being destroyed. They wanted it gone, completely erased. I convinced one man on the shelf. Inside to preserve a copy here, off the record. I told myself one day I'd have the courage to hand it to you, but I waited too long. Daniel's jaw clenched, his chest heaving. Why wait at all? Why let me believe I was the failure, while you kept the truth hidden? Keanu lowered his gaze, his voice steady but filled with shame. Because I didn't want to face you. I was ashamed of what I'd signed, of the silence I chose. Every time I thought about reaching out, I imagined your face, your anger, and I told myself it was too late, that maybe you were better off moving on, even if it meant carrying the wrong burden. Daniel let out a bitter laugh, though it cracked under the weight of tears. Better off? You think I was better off burying my wife without the comfort of knowing it wasn't my fault? Better off raising my daughter while she thought her father was broken? I built my whole life on a lie, because you were too afraid to knock on my door. Keanu didn't argue. He let the words pierce him. His silence was no longer avoidance but acceptance. Finally, Keanu spoke, his voice firm. I can't change the years you lost, but I can make sure they never erase you again. If you'll let me, I'll take this footage, these reports, and I'll put your name back where it belongs. Not in whispers, not in shame, in the light. Daniel stared at the monitor, watching the frozen frame of the snapped cable. His throat tightened as the truth dug deeper into him. His fall from grace hadn't been his doing. His exile had been crafted to protect a studio's image, while he became the sacrifice. His voice softened, almost breaking. So, I wasn't the failure, I was the scapegoat. Keanu nodded. Yes. And that ends now. For the first time, Daniel let the words sink in fully. His body sagged as though the crushing weight he had carried for so long was finally easing. It didn't erase the years. It didn't bring Anna back. But it cracked open a space inside him where something like healing could begin. Keanu placed a hand on the binder, his tone resolute. Tonight is the start of putting your name back where it belongs. No more shadows, no more lies. Daniel closed his eyes, a single tear slipping free. For the first time in years, it wasn't from shame. It was from the fragile, almost terrifying possibility that his story wasn't over after all. Emily climbed onto the couch, patting the spot beside her, as if inviting Keanu to sit. He smiled faintly and joined her, while Daniel remained standing, arms crossed tightly over his chest, uncertain whether to feel exposed or relieved. Emily held up one of her drawings, a fresh sheet with bold strokes of red and blue crayon. This is Daddy saving the day, she explained. He's catching someone before they fall. Keanu took the paper carefully, studying it, as though it were priceless. It's beautiful, he said sincerely. And you know what? That's not just your imagination. He really has saved people. He's saved lives you'll never even hear about. Emily's eyes lit up. She turned to Daniel. See, Daddy? I told you. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. His emotions swirled too strongly to form words, so he only nodded. Another cough rattled through Emily's chest. This one lingered longer, and she clutched her side briefly before catching her breath. She forced a smile, though her cheeks were pale. It's just a tickle, she said quickly, glancing at her father. Daniel moved closer, his worry plain. Emily? But Keanu gently touched Daniel's arm, shaking his head softly. Then he looked back at the little girl. You don't always have to say you're fine, he told her. It's okay to be honest. Being strong doesn't mean hiding how you feel. Emily blinked at him, as if the thought had never occurred to her. Slowly, she nodded. Sometimes it hurts, but I don't tell Daddy because he already hurts. I don't want to make it worse. Daniel's face crumpled. He turned away, a hand covering his mouth as his shoulders trembled. Keanu reached out, placing a gentle hand over Emily's small one. Listen to me, Emily. Your dad isn't hurt because of you. He hurts because he loves you so much. You never have to hide from him. Love means sharing even the hard things. And I promise you, you won't have to keep hurting like this. We're going to get you what you need. Emily tilted her head. Promise? Keanu nodded firmly. Promise. I won't let you suffer because of things that were never your fault. And I won't let your dad carry this alone anymore. Emily smiled faintly, her eyelids heavy as the day's energy drained out of her small body. She leaned against the couch, clutching her crayon like it was a sword she could take into battle. Daniel finally sat beside her, brushing her hair gently away from her face. Keanu watched them quietly, his heart heavy but resolute. He knew this wasn't just about correcting the past anymore. It was about ensuring a future where Emily could breathe without fear, and where Daniel could finally stand without shame. The little girl drifted into a light sleep, her soft breaths uneven but steady enough for now. Daniel looked across at Keanu, eyes shining with unspoken gratitude and the first fragile spark of trust. For the first time in years, Daniel believed that maybe his daughter's words were true. Maybe heroes really did get back up. The night was quiet when it happened. Daniel had just returned from a late shift, his body aching, his eyelids heavy. Emily had insisted she was fine earlier, coloring at the table and humming to herself. But just past midnight, the sound shattered the stillness, coughing, sharp and violent, echoing from her small bedroom. Daniel rushed in to find her collapsed on the floor, her crayon still in her hand, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. Panic surged through him like fire. He scooped her into his arms, whispering her name over and over, his heart pounding as though it would burst. Her breaths were shallow, ragged. He didn't think he just ran. Down the stairs, into the cab, the rain-slick streets blurring past as he sped toward the hospital. His hands shook on the wheel, his voice breaking as he pleaded, "Hold on, baby. Hold on." By the time he carried Dot through the sliding glass doors of the ER, his legs felt ready to give out. Nurses rushed forward, taking Emily from his arms, laying her on a gurney, attaching monitors. Daniel stumbled after them, desperate to follow, but a doctor stopped him at the threshold. "Sir, you need to wait here." The words cut like knives. Daniel pressed his fists into his temples, pacing the waiting room like a man trapped in a nightmare. His daughter was behind those doors, and all he could do was stand there, helpless. Minutes blurred into an eternity. Then, through the automatic doors, Keanu appeared. Dressed simply, a jacket thrown over his shoulders, he looked as though he had driven straight from his own home the moment he got the call. He didn't speak at first. He simply walked to the reception desk, pulled out a card, and spoke quietly to the staff. The nurse nodded, relief flashing in her eyes. The bills, the forms, the financial barriers that had haunted Daniel for years, Keanu had erased them without a word. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to protest, to cling to pride, but the sight of Emily's name being written down without the shadow of cost broke him. When Keanu walked over, Daniel dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "She collapsed," Daniel muttered, his voice hoarse. "I heard her coughing, and then she couldn't breathe. I couldn't." His voice cracked. "I couldn't help her." Keanu sat beside him, his presence steady, grounding. For a moment, they sat in silence, the sterile hum of the hospital filling the space between them. Finally, Keanu spoke, his voice low. "I know what it's like to feel powerless, to watch someone you love slipping away and know there's nothing you can do. I've been there." Daniel looked up, his eyes red. Keanu's expression was solemn, his gaze fixed on some memory far beyond the hospital walls. "I've lost people," Keanu continued softly. "People I thought I couldn't live without. A child I never got to see grow up. A woman I thought I'd spend my life with. They were taken, and I couldn't stop it. No fame, no money, no strength could change it. And I've carried that ache every day." The rawness in his voice silenced Daniel. For the first time, he saw not a movie star, not the man who had once signed away his career, but another human being scarred by grief. Keanu turned to him, his eyes steady. "That's why I'm here. Not just because of guilt, not just because I failed you once, but because I know what it means to sit in this chair and feel like the world is about to take everything from you. And I can't let you sit here alone." Daniel's chest heaved, his fists unclenching slowly. In the quiet of that waiting room, two men bound by different tragedies found themselves connected in the same silence of loss and responsibility. The minutes crawled by, each one stretching into a lifetime. Daniel sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands pressed to his face, while Keanu stayed beside him in steady silence. At last, the doors to the treatment area slid open, and a nurse stepped out. "She's stable," she said gently. "We've got her breathing under control. She'll need further evaluation and stronger treatment moving forward, but for now, she's safe." Daniel let out a breath that shook his whole body. He pressed a hand to his chest, his eyes filling with tears he no longer tried to hide. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and grounding. "You can see her soon," the nurse added before slipping away again. Daniel leaned back in the chair, his eyes closing as relief washed over him. When he opened them, Keanu was still watching him, his expression filled not with pity but with solidarity. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," Keanu said quietly. "Not Emily's treatment, not the guilt, not the fear. I meant what I told her. She'll get what she needs, and you'll never again wonder if you're failing her because of money." Daniel swallowed hard. "Why? Why do you care this much now?" His voice trembled with equal parts suspicion and desperation. Keanu didn't hesitate. "Because I know what regret feels like when it's too late, and I won't let that happen here. You and Emily deserve a chance at more than survival. You deserve life." Daniel turned his face away, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. "I've hated you for so long," he whispered. "Every night I blamed you. Every morning I cursed your name. But sitting here, hearing you speak about what you've lost, I realize maybe you've been carrying your own kind of hell." Keanu nodded slowly. "I have. Different, but heavy all the same. That's why I see you, Daniel. Why I understand more than you think." The silence between them shifted again, no longer tense but fragile, like a bridge being built over years of broken ground. Daniel didn't thank him, not yet. But he didn't turn away either. Moments later, a doctor appeared and guided Daniel to Emily's room. She lay in the hospital bed, small and pale, but breathing steadily. Daniel rushed to her side, clasping her hand in both of his. Keanu stayed just outside the doorway, watching quietly, giving them space. Emily stirred, opening her eyes weakly. She managed a faint smile. "Daddy, I'm okay." Daniel bent close, pressing his forehead to hers, his tears dampening her hair. "You scared me, baby. You scared me so much." From the doorway, Keanu's voice carried softly. "She's strong. She's like you." Daniel turned to look at him, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken truth. Two men bound not by fame or failure, but by love for a child and the scars of loss. For the first time, Daniel let go of some of the weight, not all, but enough to breathe. The weeks after Emily's hospital stay felt different. Daniel still drove his cab, still counted bills late into the night, but a shift had taken root. Keanu's vow, his presence in the waiting room, and the hidden archive of truth had cracked open a door Daniel thought was sealed forever. One morning, Keanu called and asked him to meet at the studio. Daniel hesitated, fear and pride colliding, but he agreed. When he arrived, he found a group of young stunt performers gathered in a training space. Pads lined the floor, wires hung from the rigging above, and cameras recorded every move. Keanu greeted him with quiet confidence. "Daniel, I want you to lead this. Not as a favor, but because no one alive knows more about stunt safety than you. Hollywood has been borrowing your techniques for years. Now it's time to put your name back where it belongs." Daniel's throat tightened. "You want me to train them?" Keanu nodded. "Not just train. Build something lasting. A program that makes sure no stunt coordinator ever gets scapegoated the way you were. A program that teaches safety, innovation, and integrity. You'll be the one to shape it." Daniel looked around. The young stuntmen and women were watching him with curiosity, some with admiration. His palms were damp, his chest heavy with doubt. But then he saw Emily in the corner, sitting in a folding chair, her inhaler tucked safely in her small bag. She smiled at him, her eyes wide with pride. That was enough. He stepped forward, his voice steady though his hands trembled. "All right, let's start with the basics. Safety isn't about looking tough, it's about trust. Every time you put on a harness or step onto a rig, you're putting your life in someone else's hands. That means precision, discipline, and respect for the process." The room grew quiet, every eye on him. Daniel felt the old rhythm return, the authority of someone who knew every angle, every risk. He demonstrated how to check a harness, how to test cables, how to communicate clearly with the team before every stunt. His movements were deliberate, confident. The years of exile fell away with each word, replaced by the muscle memory of a man who once thrived here. Hours passed, and the young performers followed his instructions, repeating drills, testing techniques. Daniel corrected gently, encouraged firmly. By the time the session ended, sweat poured down their faces, but their respect was undeniable. Emily ran to him, hugging his waist. "See, Daddy? You're a hero again." Daniel's chest swelled, his eyes burning. For the first time in years, he felt the truth of her words. Not because Keanu said it, not because the studio was beginning to shift its view, but because his daughter had seen him stand tall again. Keanu stepped closer, his voice low so only Daniel could hear. "This is only the beginning. I've already spoken to the producers. Your name will be listed as the head of this program, officially, publicly." Daniel's breath caught. He turned, searching Keanu's eyes for any sign of exaggeration, but found only steady resolve. For years, Daniel had been erased. Now, his name was being written back into the story. News of Daniel's return spread quietly at first, then louder as word reached producers and directors who remembered the man they once admired. Invitations began to arrive, requests for him to consult on projects, to teach workshops, to lend his expertise. Daniel, still cautious, accepted only what he could manage. Each step forward felt like walking across unfamiliar ground, but Emily's beaming face gave him courage. On set, the young performers thrived under his guidance. They repeated his mantras about safety, discipline, and respect until they became second nature. Daniel showed them tricks of the trade, how to anticipate a fall, how to design a sequence that looked dangerous while minimizing real risk. For the first time, he felt not like a ghost, haunting the edges of Hollywood, but a man building something that would outlast him. Keanu stayed close, ensuring the industry understood what was happening. In interviews, he spoke Daniel's name openly. The techniques you see in today's stunts, the safety systems we rely on, they trace back to Daniel Harper. His contributions were buried, but they're alive in every set I work on." The words carried weight. Headlines began to shift. Old colleagues reached out, some with apologies, some with admiration. Slowly, the narrative that had branded Daniel a failure was unraveling. One afternoon during a break from training, Emily tugged Daniel's hand. She pointed to a group of young stunt performers laughing as they practiced a move he had taught them. "They listen to you, Daddy. They believe you." Daniel knelt so he could meet her eyes. "Do you believe me?" She smiled, her voice soft but certain. "I always did." The simple truth in her words nearly broke him. He pulled her close, holding her tighter than ever. That evening, Keanu joined Daniel in the training hall after everyone else had left. The light from the setting sun streamed through the high windows, painting the space in gold. Keanu walked over, his hands in his pockets. "You've done more than teach stunts here. You've given these kids the confidence to trust themselves. That's something Hollywood can't measure on a balance sheet." Daniel exhaled slowly, looking around the hall. "For years I thought my name was gone, that nothing I did mattered. But seeing Emily watch me here, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the redemption I needed." Keanu shook his head gently. "It's more than that. It's justice. Your name is being spoken again, and this time it won't be buried." Daniel looked at him, gratitude and disbelief colliding. For years he had lived as a man erased. Now, in the laughter of young performers, in the pride in his daughter's eyes, in the unwavering support of the man beside him, he found something greater than vindication. He found restoration. The auditorium was packed with cameras, reporters, and industry veterans. It was supposed to be a standard press event for Keanu's upcoming film, but he had arranged something very different. The stage gleamed under bright lights, the backdrop filled with studio logos, while journalists prepared to ask their usual questions. Daniel sat off to the side, uncomfortable in the borrowed suit Keanu had insisted he wear. Emily sat next to him, her legs swinging nervously, a drawing clutched in her lap. She leaned close, whispering, "Daddy, are you scared?" He forced a smile. "A little." She grinned. "Heroes don't have to be scared, but they can be brave." Before Daniel could answer, Keanu stepped up to the podium. The room hushed instantly, cameras flashing. He began with the expected comments about his new film, but within moments, his tone shifted. "There's someone here tonight," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "whose name you might not know, or maybe you've forgotten, but you should know it. Because without him, many of the stunts you see today, the ones you cheer for, the ones that thrill you, might never have been possible. His work has kept performers alive. His creativity shaped the industry, and for too long his contributions have been buried." Keanu gestured toward the side of the stage. "Daniel Harper," he continued, his voice firm, "is a genius of stunt coordination and safety. He pioneered techniques that are still used in Hollywood today. And yet, his career was unjustly taken from him after an accident that wasn't his fault. The truth was buried, but not his legacy. Tonight, I want his name spoken with the respect it deserves." Daniel's heart pounded as every eye in the auditorium turned toward him. He wanted to sink into his chair, to disappear. But Emily tugged his hand, her eyes shining. "Go, Daddy," she whispered. With trembling legs, he stood. The spotlight followed him as he walked toward the stage. His throat was dry, his palms damp, but Keanu met him at the podium with a steady hand on his shoulder. Applause began, hesitant at first, then growing louder, stronger. The sound filled the hall until it seemed to shake the walls. Daniel's chest constricted, his vision blurring. For years he had imagined boos, whispers, shame. Now, for the first time, he was hearing the sound of recognition. Keanu raised his hand to quiet the crowd slightly. "When you see my films and you see me perform, remember that I stand on the work of people like Daniel. He designed, he innovated, he protected us. I wouldn't be here without him." And neither would this industry as you know it, reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. For the first time in more than a decade, Daniel's name was being recorded not as a failure, but as a man whose legacy mattered. Emily clapped so hard her little hands turned red, her face glowing with pride. Her father was no longer a ghost in her drawings. He was alive, restored, honored. Daniel stood frozen at the podium, his hands gripping its edges as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The applause thundered around him, echoing in his ears. It was a sound he had not dared to imagine people honoring his name instead of erasing it. When the clapping slowed, flashes from cameras lit the room. Reporters shouted questions, but Daniel's voice caught before he could speak. He glanced sideways at Keanu, who gave him a small nod, urging him forward. He leaned toward the microphone, his throat tight. I don't know what to say. For years I believed I was a failure. I believed I had ruined lives, ruined my family. That belief nearly destroyed me. But what I've learned is that sometimes truth gets buried, and people get buried with it. Tonight, because of Keanu, I stand here not as a man erased, but as someone given a second chance. The room went quiet. Every eye was on him. His voice trembled but grew steadier as he continued. I want to thank my daughter. She's the one who reminded me every day that heroes get back up, even when the world says they can't. She's the reason I kept going. And now, she gets to see her father not broken, but standing. He stepped back, his chest heaving. The applause erupted again, louder than before. Some in the audience rose to their feet, clapping with genuine respect. Daniel felt the sound vibrate through him, filling the hollow places that shame had carved out over the years. Emily, still in her seat, cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted, "That's my daddy!" Her small voice pierced through the chaos, and laughter rippled warmly through the crowd. Daniel pressed a hand to his mouth, overcome. Keanu stepped beside him again, raising the binder he had carried from the archive. For anyone who doubts, here is the evidence reports, footage, testimonies. Daniel Harper's designs were flawless. The failure that ended his career was never his fault. Hollywood owes him an apology, and tonight, we start making it. Cameras clicked furiously. Reporters scribbled notes, their faces reflecting astonishment. An A-list actor sharing the spotlight, willingly handing over credit, was something few had ever seen. Daniel wiped his eyes, trying to steady himself. As the applause continued, he looked out into the sea of faces. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel branded or forgotten. He felt seen. Truly seen. When the event drew to a close, Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder once more. This is just the beginning. Your name belongs here. And it always will. Daniel nodded, unable to form words, but the gratitude in his eyes said enough. As he stepped off the stage, Emily ran into his arms. She wrapped herself around him, whispering softly, "See, Daddy, you're a hero again." This time, Daniel didn't argue. He just held her close, letting her words become the truth he finally believed. The night after the press event, Daniel returned home with Emily. The applause still echoed faintly in his ears, but the exhaustion of years weighed heavier than any celebration. Emily went to her room, humming softly as she tucked away her drawings. Daniel stayed in the living room, sitting in silence, unsure how to process the day. A little while later, Emily appeared with a small cardboard box, one of the toy boxes she had kept since she was younger. She placed it on the table with a shy smile. "Daddy, I found something." Daniel frowned. "What is it, sweetheart?" She lifted the lid and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed with age. On the front, in delicate handwriting he knew instantly, was his name, Daniel. His breath caught, his hands trembled as he reached for it, recognizing the familiar curves of his late wife's script. Emily's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "It was at the bottom of the box. I don't know how it got there." Daniel stared at the letter for a long moment before finally breaking the seal. His vision blurred before he even began to read. Keanu, who had stayed after walking them home, sat quietly in the corner, giving space but bearing witness. Daniel unfolded the paper, the words pulling him back to a time when Anna's voice still filled the house. "My love," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, but I needed you to hear these words. I have watched you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, doubting yourself, punishing yourself for things that were never your fault. But I have never doubted you, not for a second." Daniel's lips parted, his breath shaky. His eyes skimmed the lines, his voice catching as he read aloud so Emily and Keanu could hear. "You were born to create, to protect, to inspire. I know the world has been cruel, and I fear it may take years for them to see what I already know, that your work, your brilliance, will not stay buried forever. One day, Daniel, they will speak your name with respect. And when they do, I want you to believe it. I want you to remember that I believed it first." Tears spilled freely down Daniel's cheeks. His hands shook as he gripped the paper, the words blurring through his grief. Emily moved closer, resting her small hand on his arm. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes glistening as he listened. Daniel continued, his voice trembling. "Promise me you will not let bitterness steal your spirit. Promise me you will never stop believing that you are worthy of the life we dreamed of. Even if I am not there, I will always be with you in every breath of our daughter, in every step you take toward the man I know you are. Do not give up, my love. Your story is not over." His voice broke completely. He pressed the paper to his chest, sobbing silently. Emily climbed into his lap, wrapping her arms around him. "Mommy knew," she whispered. "She always knew." Daniel closed his eyes, holding his daughter close as if she were the bridge between past and future. Across from them, Keanu bowed his head, the weight of the moment settling over them all. For the first time, Daniel felt grief turn into something else, not just sorrow, but purpose. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand and steadied his breathing. The letter trembled in his grip, but he forced himself to keep reading aloud, each word pulling him closer to Anna's voice. "Tell Emily that her mother loved her beyond words. Tell her I believed she would grow strong, brave, and kind because she would have you as her father. She will need you, Daniel. She will need your strength, even when you feel empty. Don't let her see you as broken. Show her the hero I fell in love with." Daniel's voice cracked. He pressed the letter to his lips, then lowered it slowly, his eyes glistening. Emily's small fingers tightened around his arm, her face tilted up to him. "Daddy, Mommy was right. You are a hero. To me, to her, to everyone." The words struck him deeper than the applause of the press event. They were pure, spoken without hesitation. He pulled Emily into his chest, kissing the top of her head. His tears dampened her hair, but he didn't hide them. Not this time. Keanu stepped forward now, his voice quiet, reverent. "She believed in you before the world did, and she was right. I see it now, Daniel. Everyone does." Daniel looked up, his gaze steady even through the tears. "For years I thought Anna died believing I had failed her. I thought she left this world ashamed of me. But she knew the truth long before I did." He placed the letter carefully back into the envelope, holding it as though it were made of glass. "This isn't just a message, it's a command to keep going, to turn grief into something she'd be proud of." Emily snuggled against him, her voice muffled against his chest. "Then we'll do it together, Daddy. Me, you, and your friend." Daniel glanced at Keanu, the faintest smile breaking through his grief. "My friend," he repeated, the word tasting new and real. For a long moment, the three of them sat together in the dim light of the apartment. No cameras, no reporters, no stage. Just a man clutching a letter from the woman he loved, a daughter who had never stopped believing, and a friend who had refused to let the truth stay buried. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full of memory, of hope, of a future no longer chained to shame. Daniel felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because it finally had meaning. He kissed Emily's forehead, whispered to her softly, Mommy was right. Our story isn't over. And for the first time since Anna's passing, he believed it. Weeks turned into months, and the echoes of Daniel's restoration rippled through Hollywood. He returned to the studio halls not as a forgotten man hiding in the shadows, but as a teacher whose lessons carried the weight of survival, creativity, and redemption. Young stunt performers gathered eagerly around him, their eyes bright as they listened to his voice. He showed them how to wire a harness correctly, how to anticipate failures before they happened, and how to work as a team where trust was the lifeline. Every instruction carried the depth of a man who had walked through ruin and chosen to rise again. Emily often sat nearby during those sessions, healthier now, with proper treatment and care. Her laughter floated through the studio halls. Her crayons scattered across the corner table as she drew new pictures. No longer were her superheroes only imagined. Now her father stood before her as living proof of what she had always believed. Each time Daniel looked at her smiling face, he drew strength from it. Keanu never took the spotlight. He stayed at the edges, watching quietly, ensuring Daniel had the room to reclaim his place. He didn't need recognition. His fulfillment came from seeing a man he had once failed stand tall again. Sometimes he would nod to Daniel from across the room, a silent reminder that he was there and always would be. Late one evening, after a long day of training, Keanu sat alone in his apartment. The city stretched outside his window, neon lights flickering against the glass. He opened a worn, leather-bound journal and began to write, his thoughts pouring onto the page. "Redemption is not about erasing the past," he wrote slowly, each stroke deliberate. "It is about facing it, about finding those we failed, and standing beside them until they rise again. I carried guilt like a shadow, but I see now that guilt alone changes nothing. Action does, friendship does, truth does. And sometimes, the second chance we give another becomes the second chance we never knew we needed ourselves." He paused, staring at the words before closing the journal softly. His heart felt lighter, as though the act of writing had sealed something that had been broken for too long. The next morning, the three of them, Keanu, Daniel, and Emily, walked out of the studio together. The sun cast long beams across the lot, their shadows stretching far ahead. Emily skipped between them, holding both men's hands. Daniel walked taller than he had in years, his steps steady and proud. Keanu remained calm, quiet, but there was a faint smile on his lips. From a distance, their three shadows merged into one path, weaving together past, present, and future. The man who had been erased, the little girl who had believed without doubt, and the actor who had carried guilt all walked forward together. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't the end of pain. But it was redemption, and it was real. In the weeks that followed, a quiet montage of moments unfolded, weaving together the threads of restoration and hope. Daniel's hands, once calloused from gripping a taxi wheel, now guided young stunt performers as they practiced mid-air flips and high falls. His voice carried across the rehearsal hall with authority and care, shaping a new generation with lessons born from pain and perseverance. Emily's presence transformed the studio into something brighter. She ran between the pads with her sketchbook, stopping to show performers her drawings of them as heroes. Her cough had softened, her cheeks rosier now that treatment was within reach. Every laugh she shared was a victory, every breath a gift Daniel no longer took for granted. And always, Keanu lingered at the edges. He never stepped forward to claim praise. He stood quietly in the back of the room, leaning against a wall, watching with a small, contented smile. His role wasn't to shine, but to make space for Daniel's light to return. And Daniel knew it. Each time their eyes met, he gave Keanu a nod, a silent thank you that needed no words. At night, after long days of training, Daniel would sit with Emily at the small kitchen table. They would pull out Anna's letter and read a line or two, letting her voice guide them. It no longer brought only tears, it brought purpose. Emily would trace the words with her finger, whispering, "Mommy knew." Daniel would nod, his heart full. She had been right. One evening, Emily drew a picture that captured everything. It showed 3 figures walking side by side. Her father in the middle, tall and strong. Her own smaller figure skipping at his hand, and another man just behind them, steady and watchful. Across the top, in bright crayon, she had written, "Heroes get back up." When Daniel saw it, his throat closed. He kissed the top of her head and whispered, "You saved me, Emily." Keanu visited later that night, and Emily proudly showed him the drawing. He knelt beside her, his eyes glistening as he studied it. "That's perfect," he said softly, "because it's true." Time passed, and Daniel's name began to appear again in credits, in articles, in conversations spoken with respect rather than whispers. Hollywood had begun to repair the wound it had caused, but for Daniel, the truest healing came not from applause or recognition. It came from his daughter looking at him without doubt, from knowing he had fulfilled the promise in Anna's letter, and from the quiet strength of the man who had stood beside him when he could not stand alone. On the final day of that season's training program, Daniel gathered the stunt team together. Emily sat in the front row, her legs swinging, her sketchbook on her lap. Keanu stood in the back, silent but steady. Daniel's voice carried through the hall. "I used to think my story ended in failure. I thought I was finished. But what I've learned is that failure doesn't define us what we do after it does. We get back up, and sometimes, when we can't, someone reaches out a hand to help us rise again. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us heroes." The room filled with applause. Emily clapped the loudest, her smile brighter than the stage lights. Later, as the 3 of them walked out of the studio into the golden light of sunset, their shadows stretched across the pavement. Slowly, the 3 shapes merged, indistinguishable from one another, as though the past, present, and future had fused into a single path. Keanu glanced at Daniel and Emily, his voice low but resolute. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about carrying it forward, together. And with that, the story closed not on shame, but on legacy. Would you give someone a second chance if it cost you everything? Tell us in the comments.